Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Creating Data Visibility Through Continuous Data Mapping. We are so glad you're able to join us today. My name's Marissa with ActiveNav, and I'll pass it over to our speakers to introduce themselves. Welcome, Dean, and welcome, Ryan.
All right. Thanks, Marissa. Thanks for the intro, and excited to be here today. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and walk us through your background, and then I'll do mine next.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me, Dean. Great to be here. I'm Ryan O'Leary. I'm the research manager at IDC, the market intelligence and global IT advisory firm, who covers privacy and legal tech. So, I spend my days covering privacy technology as well as, pretty much any piece of technology that the legal department touches. Been doing that for a number of years now. And prior to joining IDC, I managed Masterworks eDiscovery at General Electric, as well as their contract lifecycle management implementation and a whole bunch of other in-house legal stuff. And once upon a time, I used to practice law as well a little bit, but recovering now.
Nice, thank you. Well, I somehow missed that I didn't have my Esquire on here today. So I'm Dean Gonzalski. Like Ryan, I'm a former practicing attorney. Haven't done so in a long time. My bar fees and dues would be massive if I ever tried to get back current again in California. But again, Dean Gonzalski, I'm the CRO and CMO at ActiveNav and help orchestrate kind of all of our go-to-market motions out there. ActiveNav is a data privacy and information governance software company. We're based, where I actually am today, in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And normally I'm out in California. And I think, Ryan, you're up in Boston. You in Boston today?
I am just outside. So you can hear the leaf blowers in the background, maybe, because it's fall in New England right now.
Right. We don't have leaves, you would think, in California as much as palm trees, but there's still leaf blowers everywhere. So it's the whole, we digress. Your chat about lawn care questions can come in later. Please do use the chat or Q&A buttons as we go through. This is going to be exciting in that we've got, Ryan really has some great content that we're going to share. And I'll just go through the slides. Ryan, if I'm going too fast, let me know. But I need to start out with what people see traditionally as data and lots of it.
Sure, you're going to get hit. Not only is this presentation about data, but you're going to get hit over the head with a whole bunch of IDC data. So hopefully it's not too much of a fire hose situation. So this is what IDC calls the global data sphere. This is, broken out by region. You can see there all of the data created in 2020. So that includes, every Netflix movie, every TikTok dance, every, anything that you're doing on the internet that's generating data, which is everything, right? 59 zettabytes, which I can't even begin to quantify in terms of what that looks like physically or in hard drives or any other measure, but it's a staggering amount. That's just all the data we create, right? Because, when you watch a Netflix movie, they create a new copy of that movie for you every time to stream and then delete it. So if you just click ahead, Dean, this is what we actually keep of that 59 zettabytes. So 4.2 zettabytes. And us in North America here and in Western Europe and, Asia Pacific and the People's Republic of China, we make up most of that data, right? These are all places that have pretty strong data privacy laws and regulations. And not all of this data is useful, but all of this data carries risk. I mean, this makes up, all the business data in the world, all of the, personal data that ActiveNav or anyone else has on you, right? So there's a staggering amount of risk. So if you want to go ahead to the next slide. And with that risk, we also have kind of this, especially since the pandemic has started, the frequency of security events. We have threat actors out there that are becoming increasingly sophisticated. You can't have ransomware. You can't open the newspaper without reading about ransomware. We ran this survey in December of 2020. So the pandemic was pretty much raging at that point. And, more than 50% of organizations experience business email compromise you know, frequently, at least yearly, right? Or at least or quarterly or more. So, and then there's a ton of ransomware events. You have to protect those 4.2 zettabytes from all of these different security events. And this is, you know, this is a staggering problem, right? But if you have a handle on your data, you may be able to kind of prioritize better and, you know, have better protection and you know, there's some of this data that you don't need to protect. Dean, is this something that's resonating with your clients?
Oh, for sure. And I think a couple things I've seen lately is that I like because in its simplicity is assume breach, right? It feels like over the last 10 years, it was like, well, we might get breached and only our neighbors get breached. And then you see people like T-Mobile who sadly seems to get breached all the time. And you feel bad for them. But I think that's the nature of the beast we're at now is it's no longer if or even when, it's just how often. And maybe even some scenarios where I'm staying here at one of the formerly known SPG properties, but you know, with Marriott, they bought that breach, right? They bought a breach that had already happened within SPG when they purchased them. It didn't come out till later. So I think this is the new normal. There's unless you want to tell me otherwise, it doesn't feel like the genie's going back in the bottle anytime soon, and this will continue to escalate. And I was going to highlight a little bit of the records one up top. I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but there are discrete costs for you know loss of records and records restoration. And so for anyone trying to make a business case for their organization about how many records they keep and data minimization and rot cleanup, I mean, whether you have to restore a record, whether you have to identify who owned the record as part of your breach notification process, that there's just no doubt that all this information is costing you money. And as we'll talk about throughout, I think very few companies are harnessing a lot of this data for good. And that's that to me is the dangerous part in all this. Is it used to be like, let's capture all this data and we'll eventually make some sense of it with analytics and machine learning and the like. But the reality is very few companies are doing that. When they do it, it's highly curated data, and the rest is just out there to be exposed. And I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, and I think you look at that, over 50% of folks said that they experience a loss of more than 1,000% of or 1,000 records of PII every year. The folks that answered never, I have a lot of questions for them. But you know, the other folks, you know, you got to think about what we're going to talk about on the next slide, the data privacy regulations, right? A lot of those breaches can be penalized under these laws. And this is, you know, this slide is impossible to update at a frequency that would even begin to capture the amount of data privacy regulation that's out there. I mean, you look at, you know, Washington, Virginia, you know, Colorado, Massachusetts, where I am, has one on the books right now that's being debated. The only thing that's really missing is you know, a federal data privacy law in the United States, but these costs can get astronomical, and not to mention that, you know, every time you get fined, not only do you have to write a check to some government around the world, but you know, your name's going to be on the front page of the newspaper, and everyone's going to know what a bad organization you've been, right?
Yeah, and Ryan, just really quick sorry to interrupt, but on the federal preemption, I mean, do you see that coming down the pike? And I guess one of the things for me is, to the extent that it does happen, it feels like, I'm from California. California feels like a special snowflake. And that even if there was a federal law, I could see a scenario where California would be have protections expansive of even that. So do you see federal preemption sort of solving this and making kind of a one rule for everyone to follow?
No, I mean, I think federal preemption would potentially create a floor that, you know, the majority of the states might be at, but you're still going to have your Californias, your Massachusetts, your Illinois, your Washington states that are going to go a little above and beyond that regulatory floor. But it would at least give a baseline for compliance, for you know, and solve some of the kind of patchwork situation that we have right now. Is it going to happen with this Congress? Probably not. They don't seem to be able to agree on much of anything. So we shall see. I mean, I think we've been talking about federal preemption for at least 3 years since GDPR came in, and it's not happening anytime soon.
Yeah, and you mentioned sort of the floor and the ceiling. I think it's an interesting way to think about it. Are you seeing most of the folks you talk to try to build to the ceiling so that they've built the kind of the high water mark, or is that even a thing yet?
That's not really a thing yet. I think they're just trying to comply with the most, have the most comprehensive plan that they can put in place with like as few moving parts as possible, right? Kind of a one size fits most situation.
Kind of
With
80-20, if you
yeah,
will.
really kind of working on that risk prioritization because, as we're going to talk about as we get further on in this presentation and kind of the data, right, is just, that 4.2 zettabytes, it's not easy to do. And it's also, unless you're an active nav or, any other data privacy or data mapping technology out there, data privacy is not your business. It's a thing that you have to do. It's a administrative task almost, right? And it's a huge pain.
Right. Let's go to next here.
Yeah. So if you can, this is what I call the container store problem, right? This is what we're really dealing with.
Well, how did you get a picture of my closet? That's I don't remember sending this to you.
Well, we have many ways. We have many ways, Dean. Right, this is what the enterprise looks like right now. You don't even know what you have. I mean, I talk about this all the time. I used to, when I was working at managing mass storage eDiscovery for GE, having to find data and go back and, that company had 100 years of history, and there was data from all 100 years of that company's history. The people don't throw anything out because you might need it. Everyone has that junk drawer, but that's really not what's going to help us. You need to be able to find your shoes. You need to be able to find your shirt to be able to address these problems. You need to know what's what. And unfortunately, much like the container store, if this problem was solved, that the container store would no longer exist, right? If everyone's closet was organized. So that tells me that the majority of people's closet is a mess like this. But we really needed to get it, if you go ahead, to look like this, right? We need to be able to find everything in your closet. And one of the things that you can do when you go through this, your what I call your data closet, right, is you can really look at stuff and be like, do I really need this? When was the last time I used this, right? I know that's a popular like organization method that my wife does all the time. She's like, oh, I haven't worn this in a year. I'm throwing that out in the Goodwill bin or whatever. You have to do the same thing with our enterprise data. So if you want to go to the next.
Well, I was going to say, what I like about this is just you see instantly the visibility, right? Which is to us, we talk a lot about zero dark data, and we think that dark data is a big problem. And so a little bit like the previous slide, it's messy, but it's also the light's not on.
Mm-hmm.
So you really can't find anything. And here, the visibility and shining a light on this is like, oh, well, there's that striped, pink one up over there. And okay, that's useful or not useful. And you can make decisions about it. Feels like if you can't get past the visibility phase, people really get stuck.
And if you have useful data, right, and you don't know where it is, you can't use it anyway. So it's not really useful. You're frustrating the whole purpose. And one of the things that we've seen with data privacy regulations is the data subject access request, and how it can cripple an organization if they don't know where their data is. That the data subject access request should be easy, right? You should be able to, hey, I need all the data you have on me. Well, you just go down to the unstructured organized data closet and just pull out all the data you have on John Doe, right? But instead, what we're having is, especially in Europe, we're having 135 data subject access requests a month. And in Germany, it was even higher, right? And the vast majority of data subject access requests require a good amount of spend to comply with, because you have to go and do a lot of manual processes to go out and find that data, look at all the content permissions and all of the, is it on legal hold? Is it privileged? Like, what can I even give this to somebody? Dean, is this something that is impacting, how active nav is helping clients?
Yeah, I would say it certainly is. We don't have a DSAR sort of module per se. What we do is upstream of that, which is just help companies understand their data estate to begin with, because I think the underlying assumption here is before somebody goes to respond to the DSAR, that you have to understand where your data is, not only notionally, but also in reality. And so one of the things that we're seeing is there's a lot of solutions out there that have kind of workflow oriented, static based, and kind of custodian generated maps of data, which then means you look where people tell you the data should be. And so we believe the next evolution is a revolution, maybe, is that people actually understand where their data is at a granular and file based level, and that makes your DSAR response process not only easier but more accurate, because you don't want to get into another scenario, whether it's like eDiscovery or FOIA or whatever, where you produce something and believe you've produced the right thing, and it in fact is not the right thing.
So if you go to the next slide, you're going to see that this is mainly a GDPR problem. And even in the United States, a lot of the DSARs are related to GDPR, right? So, and the problem with this, right, is that DSARs are really the compliance with them and the ability to service them quickly and effectively is really kind of the end of a mature data privacy compliance program. And in order to get to this state, to the state where you're able to service this amount of requests, we really need to dive into kind of what goes into this and what is really the fundamentals are. Because I think, and Dean and I have talked about this in the past, right, is a lot of folks are they when GDPR came out and CCPA came out, the big scary things that make the headlines is what they gravitate towards. A lot of people quickly wrote a check to some software vendor to try and solve the problem quickly and automate it, but they didn't have the fundamentals and the building blocks that they really needed to make those tools work effectively. If you go to the next slide, you'll see kind of the major pain points of this. Identity verification was the biggest pain point, which, sure, yeah, I mean, you want to make sure you're giving the right person the right data, and that's a huge problem. But just below that, and almost equal to it, is data discovery. And that's really what we want to talk about here today is, that's organizing that data closet and making sure that you have those maps and flows and really kind of the legend to where your enterprise data is. And that was a problem across the globe. And I think that Dean, are you seeing folks getting back to more of those fundamentals and not necessarily worrying about all the fancy bells and whistles of data privacy compliance and the fear tactics?
Yeah, it feels like I totally agree. Phase one was we need a privacy platform so that we can say we have a privacy platform. And then you realize that privacy platform, and it's not that those are bad, but they're very, mile wide and an inch deep. They have the ability to sort of have workflows and spreadsheets and inputs. Then you realize like that process is really manual, right? It's I don't say a glorified spreadsheet, but in many ways if it requires you to go interview a custodian and then put that in a form and then build a map that shows where data should be, that's probably a good phase one of any exercise. But very quickly, and particularly as you show sort of the DSAR numbers, you don't want to be managing this process at scale. And so what we're really seeing is data discovery is maturing as a discipline. And in particular, people are moving, the framework, at least I like, is that it's either automated in terms of it, technology goes out and finds the data, versus manual, which is like, let me talk to people about where their data should be. I think that's one. And the other is static versus continuous. So manual data discovery is, let me do this exercise and then it's done. And a week from now, it's now sort of stale, versus an automatic thing that just keeps your data discovery refreshed. And is, unless anyone thinks this whole DSAR thing is going away anytime soon, you want to try to minimize the pain associated with this and keep it evergreen. And so I think, try to summarize here, it feels like evergreen data discovery is where people need to be. And that's where the market's pretty quickly evolving into.
Yeah, I mean, this is a global problem, right? I mean, we asked everyone, and pretty much lined up with data discovery being a huge pain point. So if you just want to go next slide, the next slide kind of speaks perfectly to your the one after this.
Yeah, sorry, I was coughing. My apologies.
No worries. This kind of speaks perfectly to kind of what we were just talking about in terms of continuous versus manual, and 80% almost say that they have a data map, a data flow, but they're only updating it monthly, quarterly, or yearly. That daily percentage on the right hand side is minuscule, and then 20% are just like, nah, we don't do that. We don't have time for that. That's not something we do. Which you can't be in compliance with data privacy regulations if you're not doing this, not mapping out not only physically within what stores and where the data is within your IT infrastructure, but also geographically, because there are some localization requirements with a lot of these laws, right? And also who is accessing the flow problems. We really, the ideal state is really that continuous visibility into, and that's obviously a lofty goal, but with technology plus manual processes and stakeholders, you can get there. And I'm sure that it's the exception at this point, but it could be the rule. And Dean, are there any folks that you know of that are kind of doing this continuous, have it updated on a daily or better basis that you're working with?
Yeah, that's I mean, we'll talk, right at the end, we'll talk about the new solution we've launched a couple months ago. It is a continuous data mapping solution. It's not instantaneous, and I think your chart calls that out. There are DLP and other solutions that are trying to manage data literally in motion, second to second. We believe that you want to have a freshness state on it, probably measured in hours. So, 24, 48, 72 hours, that's as close to daily as you can manage. That way you've got a reasonable degree of freshness. And particularly when you're looking across a large data estate, doing anything more than that becomes physically almost impossible. So yes, I think that aspirationally, people should be in the daily camp. I think if you're in monthly or quarterly, and God knows yearly is not helpful, you're then really have the question of, can you rely upon the map that you built, right? A little bit like you're going on a drive and you've got a map that's 3 months old or 6 months old, and your Google Maps, like, it's not real time, but it's a couple months old, and you're like, well, I feel like I might drive into a lake that way. Or down a street that no longer functions. So it feels like, look, if you want instrumentation around your data privacy program, then it's got to be largely continuous if you can. Then one thing I also want to note, because it's here in your title, is I think it's important that we've seen there's a big difference between a map or an inventory of your data that has that looks at actual elements. So looks at a file and whether there's a social security or other piece of sensitive information in the file. That's the ultimate sort of holy grail and granularity of these sort of mapping solutions. Flows tend to sort of say, well, data is in this server and it connects to this repository and these people have access to it. And those aren't mutually exclusive. They can be helpful. I feel like a lot of people conflate a data flow and how things are kind of supposed to be at a really super high level with a real granular data map. And we probably got some data later we'll look at there, but it feels like that's one of the big differences. So I would urge you, if you have just a flow, to be thinking about how you mature that and take that kind of to the next level.
For sure. Yeah, and obviously the challenge here is it's a cost center, right? Generally, data privacy compliance and being able to, there's a lot of additional resources that are needed to do this stuff, and you look at the stuff that it needs the most additional resources. It is kind of that baseline stuff, that data security, that data governance. These are all things that I think that, we tend to, when in the beginning, we threw that giant, platform, data privacy platform at, and that the granularity is just not there. We need to go much deeper than we had in the past. And, providing some better technology solutions and going deeper into technology that actually works at the data level and not at the workflow level is really what's going to, almost be a digital coworker for your privacy compliance folks, right?
Yeah, and Ryan, we've got a good question on, I think this certainly around data mapping and continuous and the pain. It says,
Sure.
Other than the people who actually do the manual mapping, who parenthetically understand the need for continuous data mapping, who is the best person or team to go to for buy-in for continuous data mapping programs and tools? And so this maybe is even broader, which is, where do you see privacy and privacy tools sit organizationally? I've got some thoughts too, but I'd love yours as first salvo.
Yeah, I think we have some data on this later in the presentation.
Okay.
If you want to, I mean, we can jump around if you want.
Yeah, let's go there.
Two or three slides up ahead. One more. There you go. Up, one back. So, we asked folks, and they all said that they had a data privacy compliance department, a dedicated privacy compliance department. But when we drill down further into kind of that, that was mainly, folks doing it 10 hours a week, not necessarily, a full on, a lot of this question seems to have boiled down into, do you have a data protection or data privacy officer as required by GDPR and CCPA and all that stuff? And yeah,
people want to say yes.
People want to say yes. But so we also asked, if you go to the next slide, it seems as though it's really sitting at this center. IT has a lot of the budget, and is a strategic partner to privacy compliance. So working with IT to really understand and explaining the problem, and I think one of the things that we always say as a cost center, when I deal with legal and privacy, two major cost centers, and if they're trying to get buy-in for technology, one of the major things that we always do and I always talk about is to demonstrate and kind of evidence, how much of a problem it is, how many hours you're spending per week on this, how much waste or, and kind of frustration and pain that this is causing you, because, you can buy a lot of stuff, but, if it becomes shelfware, that's not helpful for getting budget in the future. So really working to kind of set out a business case, show not only the monetary savings, the risk savings, and the kind of the work-life balance kind of improvements, right? That that this stuff is usually going above and beyond what you're doing in 40 hours. You're probably going way over that, right? And being able to divert, it's probably diverting time away from other tasks. These are all things that need to be considered and are often forgot, because IT or the budget holders will just see like $40K a year for a license and just like shut down, right? But if you can show where that $40K is going to actually go, that's really what we need to do. But in terms of, data privacy compliance and where it's being owned, we're really seeing kind of a smashing together of IT, legal, and cybersecurity departments, and somewhat compliance depending. We're seeing legal and compliance also kind of merging into one department to a certain degree. So it seems as though IT is still holding a lot of that budget, but maybe if you can get a few other stakeholders on board, some partners and some other stuff, and show how they might be able to benefit, it's a digital enterprise problem, right? If you're working in this new kind of cloud enabled world, and what IDC calls the third platform, we can't be as siloed as we used to be, and bringing in a team of stakeholders across the organization is probably your best bet.
Yeah, and I like that, Ryan. And I guess a little bit to the question of maybe just to remind bent on legal, feels like legal is also in the best place to be able to say, are we doing this right? Are we doing this well and to the requisite level of standard of care, if you will? Because there's lots of ways to are you compliant is a tricky question, and the organization may be doing lots of things, and that's where it feels like for me, I would go to the compliance and legal departments and say, yeah, we've got a data flow. We think it's outdated. We think it's static, and when we respond, we're not terribly comfortable that it's going to stand up to any level of scrutiny. And to me, that's where I think legal could come in and be a good, then compliance teams could become a good ally to say, look, if we're going to do this, let's do it well. No one's going to probably look at data privacy and say, like, we want to be the best in the universe at being privacy compliant. But you certainly want to have it withhold some level of scrutiny, because once you have the breach, that's then where the rubber hits the road, and the question is, did you understand your data estate? Were you taking due care of the information? And you see this all the time. As one of our Active Nav's biggest customers was Equifax in its post-breach response, and they got into trouble with not just the breach per se, but all the data that existed that was compromised, that wasn't where it should have been. And that's the classic exercise. It goes back to the closet exercise. You don't have visibility. The data that gets exposed and exfiltrated is probably or possibly data that just shouldn't have been where it was or where you thought it was. And you see a lot of that with transitory data and convenience copies and all these things that are in many ways the Achilles heel for a lot of organizations. So Ryan, I threw us off kilter with that question. That'll show me to try to ask questions in real time.
No, that's fine. This is a, much like data privacy, this is a fluid and changing presentation. So if you just want to go back 2 slides now.
Yeah.
Note one more. Go forward one.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Yeah, I just want to keep on, continuing with that question a little bit. I think this is great ammo here. Is that nobody is currently managing this effectively. There's a real plurality of what folks are doing, and we asked them to select all that applied on this one, which is why it's not going to sum to 100% here. If you're looking at it being like, that's not 100. People are all over the map, or organizations are all over the map with what they're deploying to do this, because a lot of it was our hair's on fire. We're going to get that 4% fine on May 28th or May 25th, 2018. They're coming right out the gate. And then now everyone's kind of like, wait a second, I think we have more time to kind of do this. Maybe we should do it right. Maybe we should build out a better program. So I think that, it's certainly, and we're seeing this a lot in the market. I cover the market and pretty in depth. And we're seeing a lot of folks reevaluating what they're doing in terms of data privacy. So we're going to see a lot of changeover in this market. So if you want to go ahead, we can start.
Yeah, and I was going to interject here because we did some primary research, obviously not as good as IDC's, but and certainly a smaller sample size. But we'd ask people about sensitive data discovery and are you concerned about it? And universally they said yes. And we asked them, what are you doing to solve it? And it was as diverse a group of answers as you could possibly get. And I think that is one of the challenges here. And you kind of see this as, an enterprise ticketing system seems like a strange, like deploying Jira seems like a strange way to say that's your data privacy compliance program.
And this was done, this privacy survey was done before ServiceNow had a specific data privacy module. So people were just using like regular, ITSM ServiceNow to manage this stuff.
Yeah. And so I guess it's wild, wild west days still, right? There's no right answer to this. And that I guess is maybe kind of the bigger question is, how do we get to that kind of maturity? But keep going and we'll go to.
Yeah, go to slide 19. Yeah. Because I just want to harp on this, building, kind of a case for investment within the organization, since we're on it. Don't be afraid to use the pandemic. We're seeing a lot of, since the pandemic started, we're really seeing a lot of a shift from folks only investing in the offense of their organization and the ability to go out and win business, as opposed to protecting the organization and investing in security and compliance and legal and all that stuff. The overall compliance and privacy budget is increasing because of just that. And when you talk about the data sphere and that 4.2 zettabytes that I started the presentation talking about, you have all of that. I mean, I'm sitting in my house. Usually I would be in an office, right? Dean's at a Marriott or whatever. All of this data is now on, basically consumer Wi-Fi networks. There's never been more of a case for investing in visibility into what's on your endpoints, what's in your unstructured and structured data source, and really stopping talking about data as structured versus unstructured and really talking about it as just data. I think that's one thing that we're really starting to see, because if you go to the next slide.
Can I pause 1 second?
Because sure.
I love the structured, unstructured. My CTO, Rich Hale, and I arm wrestle about this all the time. And he's convinced me that it just doesn't make sense anymore, right? Because it's not this binary, it is structured, unstructured, it's all this sort of semi-structured. And to your point, it's just becomes the data that, for us in particular, it's user-created, user-generated data. That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
The PowerPoint that you and I are working on here that has 17 versions, that's or the spreadsheet or the whatever it might be. Those are the things that get moved around, shifted around. And I think in pandemic, we didn't really talk about, shadow IT or sort of semi-shadowy IT, which is like, oh, well, let's say, and of course I didn't do this because I'm a good steward of my company's information, but I mean, let's say I had it on a thumb drive and then I wanted to make sure my laptop didn't get lost on the plane. And then, so I put it up into Box and then Dropbox and then OneDrive. And then I've got this sort of same thing in 19 different places. And when you're a remote worker, right, that's probably, I haven't seen the stats on it, but I'm sure it's the proliferation of that user generated data kind of everywhere becomes, even more problematic.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We must have data on that somewhere. I'd have to look that up, but that's a huge problem, and especially when those devices are unmanaged.
Yep. All right.
And this is what we're talking about. I mean, the average organization says that they have 22.65 employees managing data privacy, but that's only at 10 hours a week, right? And many have more or less than that. And these it's not the main business of these organizations. So you really need that digital coworker or investing in technology to be able to do this. And to build out kind of that program. And I think we have one slide after this around KPIs, which I do want to touch on, because we have been going for 40 minutes here talking about this. I'd love to get some questions.
Yeah.
But building out there is no real KPI, or we really need to operationalize this. We're seeing a variety of different kind of approaches to the KPIs and assessing what the privacy department is doing and its effectiveness, and we see this all the time in legal as well, is that Generally with privacy and legal departments, the major KPI that they use is the rest of the organization mad at me or not? Is our name in the paper or not?
Okay.
And there's no way to really understand and improve your processes, figure out where you're failing without kind of implementing a data map, a data flow, both of those, either of those, to really be able to understand what you're doing, where you're doing it, and why you're doing it, right?
Yeah, and it strikes me as you look at a lot of these, Ryan, a lot of them they're independent of quality and accuracy, sort of
Yeah.
like requests served,
So did we get
completion
it done?
rate. Did we get it done? And then the question is like, well, sure, that you got it done. I mean, no one's gonna say that's a bad idea. Is it accurate? Was it painful? Back to the maturity model. This to me strikes sort of this maturity model of the privacy area generally is that's probably phase one of your maturity models. Like, are we just getting stuff done? I haven't done a lot of work on maturity models, but maybe you have. It feels like that's kind of the basic. And now we're at the position to say, okay, now let's think about the quality of this. Let's make it less painful on the organization. And those are hopefully where the industry, starts to mature into. And what I'll do is I'll hit this slide. I'll take just a couple seconds and we'll jump into questions.
Sounds good.
Not surprisingly, and as you and I have talked about, Ryan, we're working and have been working on a data mapping solution. We call it inventory. Fundamentally, that's what it does. It creates an inventory of all your user-generated, user-created data. And I think the big point that we're finding with customers is that once you do that and you generate a data map, and you're looking at billions of items for most organizations, and certainly at the petabyte scale and high terabytes and into petabyte scale, then you need to have visualization. And for us, then the next amplification of that is health scoring. Because once you can see your data, it's a little bit like your closet, right? That closet was easy. The clean one was certainly, there's 40 or 50 things and the shoes look like shoes, and you can pretty quickly look at it. When you're looking at billions of items and some have degrees of sensitive information and toxicity, then you need the help of algorithms and other things to help score those so that you can understand where to start, because not all sensitive data is created equal. And so that's one of the things that the inventory solution does for us. It's SaaS-based, so it's easy to turn on. And that's one of the things that we found is critical, is if you're going to deploy a continuous data mapping solution, it can't take you, weeks and quarters or years to get it going. And so that's for us, it's really exciting. Low footprint, really easy to get into. And so if you're interested in this, we've got some areas you can follow up with us later on it. And then on questions, Marissa just popped in. Are you going to ask the questions, Marissa, or you want me to keep going?
It is up to you, but I'm certainly happy to pose them. And I'm curious, before we get into a couple of the great audience questions, and for the audience, keep submitting them. If we go back to that KPI slide, on the marketing side, we have plenty of KPIs. How would you both maybe pick like two that you would say maybe on this list or not on this list that you would prioritize for the effectiveness of a privacy program?
I've got one. I'll just start and then maybe give Ryan a second.
Sure.
I like the company versus peer benchmarks. I think to me, maybe that speaks to the attorney in me, right? You want to be.
That's the one I was going to call out as well.
So okay. So now I'm glad I took it, and now I'll give you time to think of yours. The rest are sort of, I'm gonna say, busy work metrics of like, incidents and response times. They're things you should track. I don't think they're key in the definition of KPIs, right? They're things that you would track, and that's good. I think that the question to me is, are you really doing a good job at this? And I like the peer benchmarking one. And Ryan, I'm sorry I stole yours, but maybe you got
no. I think it speaks volumes that that's one of the lowest selected ones, right? The other one that I would call it is risk scoring generally. I think there's a tendency in the market to try and sell risk scoring as kind of a feature. And a one size fits all, when the risk appetite is very different from organization to organization. And what is a risk to you? I mean, what is a risk to you is different than what is a risk to everyone else. I may go 75 on the highway and Dean may go 85. That's a risk calculation, right? And every organization needs to spend more time, I think, thinking about what is an okay risk for them and what they're okay with versus what is absolutely paramount, because that's going to really inform your data discovery and data classification and all of that other data protection stuff.
Yeah, and let me hit on that just for a second, because it goes a little bit to our solution, the inventory solution, is that the scores are tunable. And so they come out of the box, you'd out of box a sensitivity score for privacy data. And then if you think about somebody like an Equifax, you'd say, well, Equifax is supposed to have a bunch of really sensitive data. So they would want to tune their scoring to say, hey, this data, we should have sensitive data, right? Maybe different than a manufacturing company or a real estate company, whatever it might be. And so our belief is that the ability to tune the scoring to your own business's unique needs is really important, as well as finding new categories. We have a customer we're working right now, a private equity company, and they want to be able to find material non-public information. Well, there aren't patterns for that. There aren't, social patterns, social security number patterns or passport number patterns. And so the ability to, I think, Ryan, as you highlighted, is like your appetite and your unique business is really kind of where we think things will mature into here over time. All right, Mister, did you want to fire away with the balance of the questions and take us on
fire
home?
away. So we'll start with this one. How does zero trust play into this data privacy domain? That's certainly a topic that we've seen pop up a lot recently.
Ryan, do you have any sense on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it plays into your risk appetite. The folks that are implementing zero trust and really locking everything down, it's an indication of a really strong data security mindset.
Yeah, and I think that again goes to the granularity of having good inventories, good maps, things that are accurate, and also working with IT, InfoSec, legal, privacy, like having all those teams working well together and not being super siloed from my perspective.
Now, we've also talked a lot about inventory versus maps. You kind of touched on that a little bit, Dean, but we've also heard, privacy versus data protection. So on the data protection concept or topic definition, do you have a good reference of what's involved, the components and the capabilities?
I would say that data protection feels massive in terms of that scope, and I mean that's the whole InfoSec and the notion that how do you sort of protect your organization generally and your information specifically. I think data privacy is a subset of that, and then we've done a few things where we would show even sensitive data discovery as even a subset under the data privacy area. So those are some big universes, and I know IDC, I'm sure, has tons of research, as does other analyst firms, to maybe orient you and try to figure out how these various solutions fit the right use cases. And it's certainly horses for courses, because if you can pound a lot of nails with things that aren't hammers, and it's probably not where you want to be. And so understanding the tooling that you have organizationally and just making sure it's in the right place, I think is super important.
Yeah, I mean, I think from an IDC perspective, I'm not sure about any other intelligence or analyst firms that are out there or exist. But we tend to think about it as part, data privacy is really, as Dean was saying, a subset of it. It's everything from encryption to at a file folder level, at a, DLP, data classification, data discovery. It's a massive part of that, and data privacy is just one small little piece that rolls up into it.
Awesome. Thank you both. So this one is touching on something you mentioned in the beginning, Dean, and it's more of a cultural question, which we find is always a tricky thing to put into practice and shift culture in an organization. So how do you approach that culture shift internally to really adopt that data for good or data as an asset mentality?
Yeah, we could probably do a whole separate webinar on this one, Ryan. Maybe this is for another day, but I would say
For sure.
very quickly, there are two sides of the coin, right? The data value versus data risk equation is a super important one organizationally, and different people care about different things. So your legal, infosec, compliance, risk, privacy are typically thinking more about the downside, regulatory compliance, fines, sanctions, et cetera, looking bad in the Wall Street Journal. And so that is important. But as Ryan, I'm sure you've got stats, whether in here or otherwise, this huge level of productivity and finding the information you want, harnessing information, going back to that closet example, when you want to find that shirt or the belt or whatever, the time it takes to wade through that is just significant. I'm sure it's in the billions of hours that people spend looking for stuff. And so there's definitely a business case to be made there. I think sadly, though, practically, the people who are worried about fines and sanctions and the rest are oftentimes the best place to start, because there are people who are concerned about that. They're, when bad stuff happens, people lose their jobs and people get sanctioned, and so those are powerful motivators. We often refer to those as burning platforms. That's a failed audit, a data breach, something else like that. Those are burning platforms, and those tend to mobilize the organization better than worker productivity, which is just so much more generic.
Yeah, culture stems from the top, so it's got to permeate downwards.
Absolutely. Any best practices to reduce risks from IT shadow? You talked a lot about working remotely, and I'm sure that's something that's proliferated, like you guys said.
I would,
for me,
go ahead.
just banning BYOD culture en masse is my idea. My ideal. I think that the amount of dollars saved by having people bring their own devices is not worth the risk of not being able to manage them. I mean, if you've done any eDiscovery in your life, the heinous stuff that people will put on their personal endpoints or even on their work endpoints. I'd rather keep it all on the work endpoint.
Yeah, just to the extent that you can lock down the use of thumb drives and file sharing services, and have the right level of authorized ones, which is always hard, is pretty key. But I do think it does beg the point about things like Slack and Teams and LinkedIn and these other services that aren't really shadow IT, but you can use them in a shadowy way. That to me is sort of another. That's why Slack. You can do almost anything in Slack right at this point, and so it does become kind of a challenge there.
All right. Well, thank you to our audience for those great questions. We'll wrap up with one more to Dean and Ryan. Each of you, if you could give your final takeaways for our audience today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dean. I really appreciate it. This is always a great conversation. I think for me, the big takeaway is to just really think about, when you're going through your data and collecting data, at the point of ingestion, really think about whether I need this, or is this worth storing in my data closet, or is this just another shirt on top of the pile?
I like that. That's the sort of data minimization sort of refrain, which I think is critical. It does make life a lot easier, and so that falls into you either dam the stream or drain the swamp. And so that was kind of the dam the stream. Stop storing things you don't need, which I can't argue with. I would then say if you want to talk about the other one, the drain the swamp, is figure out ways to get rid of stuff that you don't need. The redundant, obsolete, trivial information that's out there, it just makes everything harder. It makes your DSAR responses harder. It makes your inventory and your mapping harder. Makes employees more challenged when they try to find information. And we're just at this point now where between minimization and all the stuff, the legacy stuff you have, we've got to start managing our footprint of data. It's that can has been kicked down the road for as long as we've been creating and storing data. And I think those problems are starting to come home to roost. And where you can, I think if you can do either of those two, and ideally both, you'd be in great shape. So it was a fun conversation, Ryan. Thanks as always. And thanks, Marissa, for hosting us today.
Yes, thank you both again. And thank you to our audience for joining us. We hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.